Recorded live.
Welcome to the PipeIQ Weekly AI Podcast, where we cover all the topics related to AI business acceleration. We're in the heart of Silicon Valley, here in PipeIQ headquarters in Palo Alto, California. This is podcast number 5. My name is Eric Nilsson, and with me today I have my co-host Rajesh Karam. Today is Sunday, November 10th, 2024. Rajesh, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great, Eric. Thanks for asking. It's been, as we all know, it's been an exciting, interesting week.
I can't believe that it's been a week and it's like maybe, what is it, 5 days? It feels like it's about a month since the big event, which is we're going to talk about the election and AI tech around the election. So the U.S. election and acceleration of AI technology under the new administration. So we get to talk a little bit about the news and all the stuff going on. We'll talk about the election. And then, Elon Musk is floating around, and so is Mark Zuckerberg. And then, of course, the administration coming in and taking over. So a lot of interesting stuff happening. And then just the election itself, there's a lot of new technology floating around. So we'll talk a lot about that. But before we do that, Silicon Valley, it is a beautiful day today here. We got, it's cooling off a little bit, 70, but still sunny. And we haven't had any rain yet. So it's like another week goes by with no rain. I'm like, this could be droughish. Usually our rain comes in November. So any time now would be great. But it is beautiful weather, enjoying every minute of it. And the world still is nice here in the valley.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Good weather. I've come to appreciate this month a little bit more than in the past. So just dress a little warm, and I'll be good.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the election. Right, the election in the United States is over, and there was people on both sides of the aisle that were watching it closely, and it was a pretty close election. All things considered, it seems like the news was it's a blowout for one side versus the other, but it really wasn't. If you really look at the percentages, it was down to 1% across the nation. Every one of the swing states was like 1% delta between one party and the other party. So we're not here really to talk about the parties. We're here to talk about the technology and what's actually happening, changing in the landscape around AI.
I think, yes, it was definitely close. And again, we're not taking any sides or anything at all, but more interested in talking about the tech. Especially, I think there's two themes really, which we should probably bring out early on in this podcast. Is one is AI, of course, the other is crypto too, right? Like, I think, as a separate sort of technology theme aside from AI, I think are going to be very prominent over the next 3-4 years potentially. Just because of the actors involved, right?
Yeah. Right. Yep. I personally believe this is an acceleration, right? That's why we said acceleration in the topic, because I think that if you look at the administration bringing Elon Musk into that, and then the technologies that were actually used during the election, it's moving forward, right? We've moved from, I feel like 2020, the election was all about fake news, and now I think it was more about different channels, right? So one of the things that I noticed is that big media, the big television stations, CBS, NBC, ABC, right, had much of less of an impact, right, than they would typically have, and most of it was because of guys like us, podcasters, right? Like podcasters started, taking over the news cycle, right? So,
I absolutely agree. I think the fragmentation of channels, right, that we have seen over the last few years, I think is just intensified now. So. So it seems like Trump, kind of went all in on sort of a podcasting strategy, showing up on Joe Rogan, among others.
Right. But I know that Harris did as well, right? So it's less talked about because Trump got Joe Rogan, which made the news. But if you really look at both of the candidates, they were both on podcasts, right? And they were going after the younger voter, right? The younger generation that was, but younger, I mean under 30 years old, right? Which is not that young, but they definitely use the technology, but more importantly, it means that, technology is opening up, right? Like opening up where you used to only be able to get your information or your core information from, media. Now you're getting your information from all over the place. In fact, AI has something to do with that, right? Like there was plenty of AI content that was out there that, I think Elon did a favor to everybody by opening X and just saying we're not gonna take anything down, right? Where previous elections, if it wasn't true, then it got taken down. Where Elon just said, nah, we're just going to leave it all open. And anything that's generated, AI, not AI, voiceovers, whatever, he just didn't care. He's like, let the humans, the voters, determine what's a joke, what's not a joke, what's real, what's not real. And so instead of having, teams of people deciding for us what's real, they just let the voters, consume the information, which then made a lot of humorous content, AI-generated humorous content going on, right? And I think it took us all, at least for me, it took me a little while to catch on that, this is an AI doing this, right? Like, you realize, your filter comes in and you're like, wait, he's not saying that, or she's not saying that, right? That's somebody using AI just to make a point, right? Which I thought was interesting, right? It changed the dynamic of the media we were consuming.
Yeah, no, I think there was very little talk this time of misinformation. I mean, especially the fact that Musk, was a big sort of supporter of Trump and, donating a ton of money, etc. And the fact that he, has control of the largest social network in the world was also interesting. But I guess, we didn't hear too much about any sort of...
I think he just kept it open, right? Like, I think that was his gig. Now, open is bad to some degree because I saw a lot of inappropriate content. I'll say that inappropriate content, nudity and other things that were just coming through the streams along with all the other content, right? So certainly I don't know if the pendulum on X has swung too far, right? But openness definitely set the tone this election. And then I think Google and Facebook and others, the big social media giants, kind of had to follow along, right? Because he set the pace, and kind of like SpaceX, if you don't keep up with them, you're going to be left out of business, right? So I think there was a little of that was going on. And then the other thing that strikes me is polling, right? And whether any of the polling that you're reading about or learning about, right, is accurate as well, right? So it's like it's hard to know whether they're using AI to do polling these days, right? I got to imagine they expose the data set to some AI learning models to see if they can get better at polling. And I think they were, I was listening to some articles that they were attempting to do that, right? To attempt to determine, geographical regions of where people are voting, where you're coming from, what IP addresses you're going to, right? Accepting cookies and then them processing that if you land on a website, and then using all that to just get more accurate estimates of how you're gonna vote.
Yeah, I think clearly, I don't think the polling predicted the outcome, sort of the outcomes that we actually saw. So clearly there is a scope for, I guess, an improvement in how these things are done. But I think traditional machine learning, I'm sure, has been applied in previous cycles as well. I think the real effects of what we're going to see with the current state of current crop of AI models is probably going to come in the 2028 election, actually, come to think of it, right?
Right.
More sophisticated sort of predictions, right? That we could see. So, but this year, at least in this cycle, I don't think we saw as much sophistication, at least on the surface. As far as prediction is concerned.
Well, the other thing that Elon Musk did, which was interesting, and this is where technology can make things better, is that he went to Pennsylvania and then he hired people to go in to the polls and look at rejected mail-in ballots. And instead of just rejecting the ballot wholesale, let's say you forgot to sign a ballot, right? Whether you were a Republican or Democrat, they had a process by which they could then go back to the voter and say, hey, we've got your thing. This is your email address, automatically send it to them, give them a website you could go back in and sign, right, to make your vote count, right? So some of that work then is based on technology, right, that enables better voting, right? Because in previous elections, if you made a single mistake on a ballot, they just throw it away, right? It would just
and I didn't know this until you told me, Eric. I had no idea that this was happening or he was doing this. But when I went to vote, right, like I used a touch screen, and which was kind of, again, new tech, right? Like I didn't have to use a piece of paper. And if if there were 3 options to choose and I chose a 4th one, of course, it would immediately sort of stop you, and you can't go to the next thing. So I think I thought it was pretty cool actually what I saw. Of course, there's a cost associated with all of these things with these technologies, but given that it's a democratic process and very high stakes, right? I think it's an appropriate use of resources, perhaps. But I was pretty happy to do the touchscreen thing.
And then the election also, early voting meant that we were doing this for a month, right? Like there was a month, so Elon could they could work on those ballots and catch ones that were wrong, because early voting has enabled, a month long. And now that means that marketing spend that you're targeting people changes, because I think by the 2 weeks out, 80 million people in the U.S. had already voted. So anything that would happen in the media, any dollar spend that you have would just be wasted on those 80 million people. So somehow determining from an AI, determining how many people have already voted, so you could craft your messages. Because how many phone messages did I get texting one candidate or the other candidate, right?
So
Even
many.
though I had already voted, right? I was already done, so they were just
Yes.
wasting digital dollars, right?
Yes.
Targeting me. So I think there's some voter curve that has to be put in place now too, and technology has to take into account that different people vote at different times.
Days.
right?
Yeah. I mean, I that happened to me as well. Absolutely. I got a bunch of stuff that
Well, regardless of whether how the election turned out,
Right.
one thing that I would say is I think that if you look at the new administration,
Yeah.
they're going to double down, especially with Elon showing up and
Yes.
taking on a job of streamlining the government. Right, I think that's what they've said he's going to do, and he wants to weed out $2 trillion worth of government spend,
that's a
and
massive number.
reduce headcount and give him 2-year severances, and he's just like the government's way too big, right? And so some of this will be interesting to see, what they double down on in the government, right? If Elon gets in there, man, you could see things really change, right? From adopting technology to lowering costs of things, just what he did for the space industry, right?
Right.
Like he took the average launch was $200 million and he took it down to 10 million, right? So
No, he is of course he has the track record, and he's shown the capable of doing some crazy amazing things, right?
Right.
What I do worry about here is like separation, I guess, right? Like the world's richest man now is just going to become even more powerful. Question is, what kind of guardrails are in place?
Yeah, what guardrails are in place, and then things like Zuckerberg and OpenAI, right? Like so, Zuck is on the open source model, right? And then I think Elon does X,
Yes.
whatever his
Yes,
AI
yes,
is.
exactly. So,
Right.
is there going to be some competitive advantage for X.AI relative to
the competition. Right,
OpenAI and all the open source models, right? So Zuckerberg doesn't have a great relationship with Trump, is my understanding, and so how is that going to evolve for the open source landscape, right? Because Facebook is betting its future based on what we can see from an AI standpoint on all these open source model and their adoption. So from a regulation standpoint, if the new administration were to take on policies that are more favorable or less favorable,
to
let's just
one
say,
versus the
to one
other,
of the like to less favorable to open source, that would definitely hurt Meta. So it's going to be an interesting kind of angle here.
No,
And
I think in the end, that we've had a stock run, right? Because I think the new administration said they're not going to do capital gains tax on unrealized capital gains, and so the minute you do that, all stocks rise. I think Zuckerberg's net wealth went up, Elon's net wealth went up, everybody's net wealth went up because lower regulations is good for everybody, right? So I think that could be the case.
Yeah, definitely from a corporate standpoint, I think the market is responding in a positive way. I think that's what the data seems to be telling
Well,
us.
anytime you lower taxes, the market goes up for a little while, right?
Right.
Then there's consequences to that, right?
Right,
Deficits start to go up, and
Yeah.
you can't. You have to have Elon come in and lay off $2 trillion worth of people.
Oh my God,
Right.
yeah.
Then you can have lower tax rate because you got lower spending, right?
Right.
But a lot of times Reagan and some of these administrators would come in and get all excited about lowering tax rates, and that's great.
Right.
But if you don't lower spending, then all you're doing is eating away my wealth by inflation, right? Because you're putting inflationary pressure on your dollar because you're not bringing enough tax revenue, so you got to print more dollars or borrow more dollars, and gets messy.
It's going to be definitely going to be interesting. Ibrahim here in the comments, Eric is saying, like the fragmentation of channels. He's saying that people are gravitating more and more towards personalities and content creators. So seems like there's the implication here around influencers and
No, there's no question. Both candidates reached. I think it was whatever MSNBC reaches 4 or 5 million people a show, right? Versus Joe Rogan does 80 million on a given podcast, right? And so 80 million versus 4 million, and then a lot of the other podcasters are easily into the 4 to 5 to 10 million, audience range. And so that's where media channels all of a sudden, people are getting their information from other places. When's the last time you turned on television and watched TV news?
Right.
I can't remember the last time I've watched TV news. I'm always either on YouTube or on iTunes, listen to a podcast, or streaming of one type or another. But I'm not sitting on ABC, NBC, CBS, and MSNBC and other cable channels they're private channels. They're not just the public radio stations, or television stations. But there's a lot of them. CNN, right? That's on cable news network. That's but people aren't using the television for media as much, right? And so these media buys are making a difference. And then social channels with AI content, right? Like I saw tons of AI content, right? AI generated content on my social channels, right? And I laughed at most of them because they're usually humorous, but some of them were actually to the point, right? Trying to get across their policies. So there's
some of this AI generated content kind of is like freaky, nervous also. I mean, I saw one where Elon Musk is rescuing, I don't know if I mentioned this in our previous podcast, but he's rescuing a girl in a subway in Germany or something. Like,
right.
Some of it it's hard to tell, right? Like what's real, what's not. So definitely there has to be some, checks and balances against unreal content or AI generated content. And probably some sort of stamping is going to happen pretty soon here, most likely. Again, the fact that the new administration may take a weak regulation sort of strategy versus a stronger one that would have come from another administration is going to be interesting to see how that's going to do.
Yeah, they're definitely hands-off, laissez-faire, and governance, right? And so this will be interesting to see where that goes, and where does it go to corporate governance as well? Because when we're talking AI, we are always worried about corporate governance, right? And where's content coming from? What content are you allowed to have, right? So all of that, I assume that there will be less government regulation on this, but still court system tort-based regulation where you get sued because you're using somebody else's content, right? You can still, get sued for copyright infringement, and you can even be sued, for likeness, right? If you make somebody else and make a video making them say something, you're going to get sued sooner or later. So that's the tort system.
Yeah.
This week was also an interesting week for me because Broadcom had VMware Explorer in Barcelona. So I was over in Barcelona teaching coding with AI, right? So ChatGPT coding, which is a really interesting thing to watch people have aha moments when you have new people and you ask them how many people have written code using an AI, and about a third of them say they have, but 2/3 haven't, right? And so it was interesting. We'll talk a little bit about that. I got some interesting insights.
I think just ChatGPT is getting just better and better. Honestly, I mean, I've been running. A colleague was telling me about how it's getting fine-tuned to just like single word searches, like and I tried that. It's like amazing. You just put a term. You're not even saying what does this mean, but it's able to catch on to it and like just run with it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah,
actually, what we're seeing.
We started with this class where we just said, hey, what's the first program you ever wrote in a computer science class? And a couple of people raised their hand, hello world, right? I'm like, yeah, okay, so let's go write hello world in BASIC, right? And everybody has to think, when's the last time I saw a basic interpreter, right? And I said, yeah, I started my career, my first course was on a TRS-80, which anybody knows what a TRS-80 is. That's a tandem Radio Shack
Right.
computer 80, right? And it was based on the 8088 CPU. And so I said, that I use BASIC, so go write a BASIC program. And it would, I said, write hello world. So it did. And then I said, okay, ask it to write hello world 10 times. And so it made a for loop, and for each I through 1 to 10, and you could print hello world. And that was neat. Everybody goes, yeah, okay. And I said, okay, now I add comments, right? And it add comments because it keeps state, so it knows what you're working on. You don't have to tell it hello world every time. And then I said, add debug, right? And then add 3 debug levels, and then log the debug file to a file. And so you start learning your coding now, not based on typing syntax, right? For each, and escape and to forget. No. Now you're just talking to the AI, right? Learning how to ask the AI questions and telling it what it needs to build, and that's pretty cool. But then I said, okay, now tell it to rewrite it in Python. So it just obviously rewrites it in Python. Everybody's like, oh, that's a cool, that's neat, of course. Hello world in Python. And then I said, make it more complex, and it would make it more complex. And I said, now make it as a PhD student, right? And it would just make hello world more and more complicated, right? Like, we would use example. What did it do for you, right? Like, how is it? And sure enough, it's just kept adding complexity to the hello world. It made the function hello world, made a function. So when you would just call the hello function, right? It would add that to a function. And so it just kept making it more and more complex. And so we talked through that. And then I said, and this was the aha moment for a lot of people in AI, right? I said, okay, now have it rewrite hello world in 8088 assembler. Right, which is the original PC. I think it was an 8086 PC, right? CPU, right? Now it's all x86 compatible. That's just a PC chip in assembler. But just give it the chip name and say you want an assembler, and everybody's like, you could see everybody's eyes get big when assembler just it wrote the assembler, jump, load, add, and how many times do you actually get to see a nice clean assembler, written on your screen, right? And you're like. That's one of these things where people, and then I said, okay, now have it convert that to 6800 assembler. That's the Motorola 6800 CPU, right? And then have it convert it to ARM assembler, right? And so you start to see the power of the AI when you're teaching people this. Like, and I said, and that's just for coding, let alone every other topic that's out there, right? And then I said, there's a bunch of different chips out here. So we did some chip examples, driver examples. We did some, hey, write a device driver for an OLED, an OLED display, right? Little OLED display, and I forget the chip number. And so, and then add that to a BMP280 barometric pressure sensor chip, right? And write a driver for that, right? And make the driver for a USB-C interface, right? And so you could just add the complexity, and pretty soon you're writing like system level code, right? And then there was a topic we did where write a hypervisor on an ARM Raspberry Pi, write a hypervisor for an ARM Raspberry Pi. And for those of you who are don't know what a hypervisor is, it's like what VMware has, like Azure, Microsoft has a hypervisor that allows you to put VMs on a x86 chip, right? And sure enough, it wrote a hypervisor, and they're like, how does it know to do that, right? Well, there's professors that teach that as a grad student course, right? And then they publish it, and then goes online, and back to our original thing, like, who actually owns the right to those answers, right? Like, what's the governance model for that? And I actually had our legal come back and flag me because I had said session ChatGPT, learning how to do PowerShell coding in ChatGPT, and we're not allowed to use ChatGPT inside of VMware, and so. It got flagged, and legal gave me a call going like, so what are you doing? We're not supposed to be using ChatGPT. And I said, oh, it's an external class only. We're throwing away the code. It's just examples. We're not doing anything with it. We're not publishing it beyond, just the class, right? And so they were like, yeah, okay, we can let that slide. But governance is a big deal in this, right? In the future of AI.
I think so. I mean, how did all this data come into being? I think is a great question, right? Like, and we have already seen things about copyright on creative stuff, right? Images and video and all of that, right? But where is this going to go as far as code is concerned? All the stuff that's been picked up from Stack Overflow, for example, right? Is Stack Overflow or Reddit going to get any credit, any right? Yeah.
I was talking at the class, like, in the early days when you wrote, I said, how many of you guys had Java how many of you are in Java? Yeah, a couple people, old guys, were like, yeah, we wrote Java. And I said, yeah, I remember the Java docs and the Java books were like big Bible books, core Java books, right? And they documented all the APIs, right? And all the interfaces. And you had to read the Java docs. You had to know what the APIs were, to how to call them, and what the methods were it was an object-oriented language. And so, you had just all of the stuff, but then it moved to Google, right?
Right.
And then over time, Google was nice, but then it went to Stack Overflow, right? And it went to SourceForge and some of the other, form-based media companies that were get you good coding examples, right? Now I look at it, I go, yeah, now that's, if I were Stack Overflow or SourceForge right now, I'd be a little bit worried because now you went from Java docs to Google to Stack Overflow to now, ChatGPT or any other AI engine.
I mean, Stack Overflow has seen declining traffic for several months now, actually. So, I mean, clearly,
I could see, right. Right, and that gets back to the thing we were talking about last week of when humans stop creating content, will there be no more content, and will AIs get stupid? I don't think so, because I think in the software language, compiler, somebody has to make a compiler and then publish the specs on the compiler, and so there's enough around the interfaces that you're building that ChatGPT will always be able to catch newer information. Like when we build new features in our product, we make PowerShell interfaces for every single new feature. We make Python interfaces for every new feature. Then we publish those. So then ChatGPT or other LLMs can come through and add that to their model. So I don't see that as being a problem.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, at least based on what I can tell, with the current rate of momentum, I mean, the example that comes to mind right now is Cursor. So I think new engineers need to learn how to use AI to write the code. Basically, that's kind of the takeaway from your story, Eric, right? On the sort of dovetailing into that, Cursor, a startup, right? A lot of people, I'm told, are using their coding AI editor, right, or code editor, and they're raising money currently. I believe Benchmark, Index Ventures, and A16Z, which is a previous investor, I think, in the company already. They're all trying to, jockey
make a better Visual Studio.
Like a lead investor, and I think the initial number I heard was a $1.5 billion valuation. Now it's at $2.5 billion, I believe. So we'll have to see what they end up with, what that round looks like, but. It's catching on like fire. I've heard that name being mentioned from multiple folks. So, and Cursor seems to be getting a leg up over other tools like Codium is one I know of, and a few others too. So
these are greenfield, new, built up from the ground up. Right.
Yeah, ground up AI tools, right? So. I think clearly AI for code is going to be a pretty central, sort of one of the early themes in this AI cycle.
Right, and it gets back to the AI services, right? Like what services are going to be out there that you're going to be able to use, and accelerate your business process, right?
Right.
Same kind of things we've been talking about, right? And this is just yet another one. And I would say that code is for sure easy picking, right? Because it's just so damn structured, right?
Correct, exactly. That's what it is, right? The fact that it's structured makes it accessible to AI, like in terms of spinning up what another version is going to look like, and so on and so forth.
It'll be interesting to see Cursor and see, what user interface to how they're doing it, how are they approaching it? Because for me, AI coding is almost going to be like vocabulary, like, hey, build me this, and then it just goes and builds it, right? Oh, add this to it, right? Add a feature, right?
There's a company out of the latest YC batch. I don't know, I remember their name, but they can spin up a whole application, I think, on code up to 3,000 lines of code, I believe. So up to 3,000 lines of code, you're not going to have to. The AI can actually, do the whole writing for you. So imagine, that number just keep going up. Essentially, is what we're gonna see.
Yeah, and we talked about bug fixing, right? And like the whole QA cycle is going to change, because now you just feed back the code and you explain that you have this bug, and you just say you don't have to go through the lines of code and find out why this is happening. You just explain it to the AI, and it goes and figures it out. It just goes back and looks and goes, oh, you're seeing this. How could this be happening? And then it figures it out and then makes suggestions. Then it rewrites the code and said, here, I think I fixed it.
Right. And I think some of this, again, is enabling the AI with the right tooling, right? So if your code is, or your, let's say, compute infrastructure is in, let's say, 2 or 3 different clouds, maybe a different thing for the front end for Vercel or something like that. As far as you give it the right connectors, you give it access to the code, yes, it can, I'm sure, right, like be able to tell you what's going on and fix it for you potentially, right? That's kind of coming into the agentic sort of framework.
And then we mentioned, as we mentioned on the last show, that we're using it to write code inside of VMware, right? We have our own LLM, right, that knows the hypervisor really well, and then we ask it to build new code, right? And it goes off and builds new code. We use it for support, acceleration, explain what your problem is. And then we also use it in the field if our customer is writing a particular script or PowerShell environment, right? And they have a problem, they can give it to us, and we have a predefined template of what are the best practices for our PowerShell and our interfaces. And then we run that through that, and we tell it to document the code, right? To debug the code, to add debug flags to the code, and then give us a write-up what the code does, and then fix it, right? And then it generates all that, and we give it back to the customer, and we give the customer a bill going, here, we wrote you a document of how your code works. We've rewrote the code to fix the bugs, and here's the comments in line for the code, and it works now. Here's your service bill. Right, so it just changes the way we're actually engaging with the customer.
Absolutely. I think one of the areas where AI is going to have a very dramatic impact, seems like, in the early parts of this AI cycle, again, is services, I think, right? So now I think we are seeing 2 things, right? One is what was primarily software revenue, SaaS revenue, is going to get converted into more of a service revenue. I think you're getting a bit of a jet lag, huh, Eric? From
a little bit of a just flew back from Spain yesterday. So
yeah. So I think it's you can take some rest after this.
Well, and people that listened to our last podcast from last week, I was in Spain.
That's right. That's right.
In a hotel room doing a podcast, which was great. It was fun to do it, and I enjoyed it. And surprisingly, electrons are pretty fast because it wasn't very laggy. That's one thing I noticed.
It is great, actually.
The networks were fairly quick.
Yeah, so one service software revenue is sort of moving into more, hey, whatever you get done for the customer is what you're going to get charged for, right? It's sort of a moving to a service model. But then service industry itself, things like Infosys, Wipro, Booz Allen Hamilton, and right, like Anderson Consulting, right? That market is going to get completely transformed. The example they just gave, right, with Broadcom. I mean, imagine that kind of thing within a service business, right? Doing billions of dollars in revenue. Now you put AI on top of what they're doing, or rather provide co-pilots, right, with all of these for these employees. I mean, it's going to be completely change the game, and the speed at which something is going to get done is going to change completely too.
Well, can you imagine, just like Stack Overflow seeing less traffic, some of the consulting houses seeing less traffic because AI is just doing it better, faster, quicker.
Right.
If I have hey, tell me how to do X, Y, Z, and it, you bring in a team of 10 people, they set up, they do a bunch of interviews across all the orgs, and they figure out where you're spending money, and they give you recommendations how to make your company better, right? Well, as AI starts to take that over, right, just the time, billable hours, right?
Yes.
Billable hours will get less.
Billable hours is going to go lower, right? I think so. I mean, the whole cost structure is going to change, seems like, actually, with AI, right? Like, what companies are going to be able to charge, right? I mean, that cost structure is going to change, right? Essentially, because, I mean, a company, what would take 4 hours, now it's only going to take 30 minutes, right? Now, unless you pass on some of those cost advantages, right? Cost savings to the customer, somebody else is going to come along and do that, right? Like, so I think we're going to see overall, I think customers benefit from this. Don't you think, Eric? I mean,
customer experience is going to improve. There's no question about that.
Customer experience is going to improve. My bills for across my tech stack for things that I get done should come down as well, right? And the speed at which I mean, think about a graphic designer, right? Like, I mean, until 2 years ago, you needed a graphic designer. Like, I mean, but now come along Midjourney, DALL-E, and ChatGPT now, right? I mean, of course, the images are not the same quality, etc., right? But I mean,
sometimes good enough is good enough, right? x86 took over. There's no more mini computers left around, right? Because good enough was good enough.
Right.
They got fast enough, and the next thing you know, you didn't need that. And I would assume that a lot of these services, when AI is good enough, it's going to be good enough. Now, I'm still waiting for AI to think. We talked a little bit about that in the
Right.
course I was teaching, right? I don't think AI. I feel like AI is just a big three-dimensional search engine. So it's just searching so well and building answers,
Right.
in a three-dimensional model that you don't really notice that it's just search, right?
Right.
But it is, right?
Right.
Because I don't think it's generating new answers yet.
Right.
Like when does it discover new answers? Well, for me, when you get an android that can go off into a lab and then tinker on something and knock over a beaker
Right.
and have two chemicals, collide that you didn't have any knowledge of,
Right.
and then something happens,
Yes.
and then you document that and you learn from that. That's learning for me, right?
Yeah.
And
I
I'm not
mean-
sure AI is quite in the learning space yet.
Yeah, no. So I think you're bringing an interesting dimension that I had not thought of, honestly, which is when you have physical sort of robots, right? Then you can actually generate new physical actions in the physical
Right,
world.
right.
So then you have
and
new
see
data.
results.
You need
and
new
can do-
data.
You can do
actually.
random tests.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Random thing. Most discoveries were accidents, right? And so
Right.
because that's new knowledge is hard to come by. No, AI will still find new things, right? Like it unraveled, the proteins of life, right? So AI is capable of solving geometric problems, right? That are known models, right?
Sam
of question.
Altman, I think, in an interview with Gary Tan yesterday or day before, I think, has mentioned again, I guess, that AGI is a few thousand days away or 1,000 days away or some number like that. So thousands of days away. So we'll have to see.
Thousands of days, right. Well, this is another thing, and this is a little bit off topic, but as long as we're here and we're talking about the fact that I was in Europe and hang out at a big event, we had 6,000 people there. I would say that, I think that IT practitioners, they don't start out drinking a lot, but after they work in the business for some number of years, they all drink a lot, right? Like they just do. And I don't know what that is. Maybe it's Europe, maybe it's the pubs, maybe it's the environment, but it'll be interesting to see how AI handles the stress of work, right? Because AIs don't stress out. They don't have to go drinking at night, right? They can turn off and come back on the next day. So it'll be interesting to see whether this impacts humans and their ability to interact with AIs, and will the AIs alleviate the stress that humans experience in these fields. So not only are you to have like the way the customers interact, but the way your employees have to deal with workload, right?
So
services.
Are you, if I understand you correctly, Eric, you're saying, hey, a machine is not going to feel any stress. So
That's right. It's not
that's
going to be
right.
down at the pub drinking one off
Yeah,
because life was boring today,
Right,
or
right.
it was hard, or whatever, right?
Unless it's programmed to
Right.
feel that way.
Right, unless it's a robot, right? And I kind of look at it as this in the political sense of the word, when we're talking about elections and that, like, police officers are generally really nice people, right? Everyone I've known that has become a police officer has been a really nice person, right? But you see them 30 years later and the job does something to them, right? Because it's a tough job. Right. It is a really tough job. You're dealing with all kind of bad situations day after day after day.
Right.
And so I think police officers get a little bit angry, right? And a little tend to, abuse substances, maybe not alcohol, but they I think there is, the jobs create people over a long time, right?
Right.
And so, and all new kindergarten teachers are really happy and nice and loving, right? And by the time they're a kindergarten teacher getting to retire, they're cranky, right? And so AI might alleviate some of that, right?
Yeah,
In these roles, because it might get rid of some of the drudgery that actually happens, especially in the service business when we're talking about they got a bug and they got to find a bug. How do they find a bug? How do they answer that?
I think a lot of the tedious work is definitely going to be super amenable for AI, I guess. I mean, in the sense that it's easy for it to do, potentially.
And even pipe IQ, what you guys are trying to do at the same time. It's like, I look at pipeline and sometimes I cringe, right? Like when I know I could never work in sales because the tediousness of engaging with customers and constantly being responsive to them, and drafting up the same response to like the 15th time you've done this to another customer, right? Because it's very routine, right?
I mean, demand gen is hard. Demand gen is super hard, right? Like and just the amount of noise, the fragmentation of channels, etc., just makes it harder, actually. So on average, I think a marketer today probably has a tougher job than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, right? 30 years ago, if you were whatever, right, like you would hire an ad agency or do it yourself, but whereas, I don't know, David Ogilvy, I guess, famously said, 50% of my budget is wasted. I don't know which one, kind of thing. So
Right.
there wasn't the measurement, right? But today, I mean, just like with all this digital footprint that you have, there is definitely a strong push to measure it and understand what's going on and then act on it, right? So, which is not a bad thing, but the point is definitely, I think your average marketer or sales guy is probably more stressed today than people in similar roles 30 years ago. So
I think also the sales process has changed because a lot of smaller companies now can be in business in a big way, right? So what I mean by that is, like, in the old days, channels were locked up. You couldn't get store shelf space. You couldn't put ads out on TV because it was just prohibitively expensive. And there wasn't easy ways to put a company out there and be in business. But now basically you've got a website, you got a Apache server somewhere. It doesn't cost you very much to hang your shingle out and and get business. So now marketing is more critical because there's just more players vying for market share, right? And so,
absolutely. I mean, I think what Shopify did, let's say 10 years ago, right? Democratization of of Amazon.com, so to speak, right? I think we could potentially see something like that happen now today, where a platform available where you can go ship, kind of build a new application, a 200,000 lines of code kind of application in no time, right?
No time.
And it's just what's stopping you is your imagination of what you want to build, right? I think that kind of capability seems very plausible over the next, few years, actually.
Yeah.
So that's kind of goes into the question of creators and the kind of new power that individuals are going to have and this is going to be like.
And I think this is accelerate the number of products and solutions and services and content and media objects that are easily made. It used to be that your bulk of your dollar was building it, right? But now I'm looking and going, well, it's pretty easy to build it. Now, how do you actually get it to market and monetize that, right? And so that's where marketing and sales, it has to step up because it's easier to get the stuff done.
Yeah.
ChatGPT will build it, but then how do you engage and how do you monetize it? How do you have customers?
Distribution.
Right.
Yeah. Distribution, I think, is a big question. And I think people have not yet cracked the code, right, on agents, right? So, but clearly that's where I think a lot of the action is going to be, right? Some sort of autonomous orchestration of many of these actions, I think could essentially, take off the drudgery, allow the human to do a lot more powerful things.
Right.
That
now we're coming back full circle to the election, right? And and the administration and Elon Musk coming back, going like, how are they going to eliminate a $2 trillion worth of employments? And Elon says, don't worry, we're going to give everybody severance packages of 2 years. We just believe the government's too big, right? Now they have too many humans, right? And AI services might be part of that solution, right? Like as they use AI to do government services, right? I had to pay some corporate taxes the other day, right? And all of a sudden there's a website for it now. In the old days, you'd just print out the form, write a check, mail it out. But now they're like, hey, come on onto our website and do this. And so, AI services will actually start to impact government services as well, right? And maybe part of this next 4 years will be the acceleration of AI technology to streamline, government.
Yeah, I mean, I think Elon Musk, definitely. That seems like a positive development for AI overall, given that he was one of the co-founders of
spend more
OpenAI
money,
as well.
right. right. We'll get rid of them and we'll step in, right? Yeah. So
that's going to be interesting. I mean, overall, so I think positive for technology, perhaps, for the next few years.
Yeah, I think so. The market is responding accordingly, but I think that's just all the cap games announcements that they're not going to have cap games on unrealized capital gains. That was pretty
That's
tricky.
What you think is the
I think that's moving it. But plus, I think the administration has come down saying lower interest rates. That's common for new administration to come in and say lower interest rates.
Right.
We'll see where all that goes. But
one thing, Eric, we didn't talk about was crypto, right? So I think,
let's talk about that.
Early on,
I saw Bitcoin was at $80.
I know today 80,000.
Like,
so 80.
And I own some, and I haven't really looked at it. It's like I haven't looked at it when it was back
doing
at
good.
40, I was like, oh, look, what's it? But now I'm like, hey, how much do I have
Have
over
that,
there?
yeah.
And where is the wallet? So that's the
Oh,
classic.
that's you
That's
better
like, well, I think I have it. I was mining, so I have it in a place called NiceHash. So NiceHash is like a SaaS service that gives you the algorithm and downloads it to your GPU and lets you just grind away to GPU. And I had like a NVIDIA 3090, right, which is a pretty beefy graphics card. And so I could make $10 or $15 a day on that grinding away. And then my electricity was only probably $20 a day, so I probably lost money continuously. But now it's $80. That's double what I was.
Yeah.
What I was mining it at like 37, and I was making some money, but I was mostly paying for the same power that I was almost I was probably breaking even and making a little bit of money, maybe 10% on the. But I just felt guilty that I was burning up the planet, wasting power to mine, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah,
But
we'll have to see. We'll have to see
Crypto,
where this. Yeah,
crypto.
crypto. I think I mean, what I'm kind of wanted to just comment on was some of the tech actors took a position, right? Like, I mean, I think we have Peter Thiel supported Trump even in 2016, but like Mark Andreessen, right, was supporting Trump, right? And at that time, even Ben Horowitz as well. But then seems like they have diverged, right? Ben Horowitz more Democrat, and Andreessen was still supporting the Republican Party. But it was a crypto bet, actually, right? Like that's what it was, because if Trump comes to power, which of course I didn't see it at that time, is the fact that it's kind of a positive for crypto for sure. And that seems to be already bearing, already showing signs even within a week of the results. So
I know one of my friends put $1 million down, like 3 days before the election, right, into cryptocurrency, right, from Coinbase, because they were like, this is gonna run.
Wow.
And I did read that Pat Gelsinger from Intel bought some of his own stock, right? Like there was, people were smart enough to read the tea leaves and kind of. I'm going to remember that in 4 years from now. If there's a clear winner, there's got to be a way to make money on that, right? Like bet your election results.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, yeah.
If you believe it.
If
right?
you believe it, right? Yeah. Otherwise, $1 million could have gone the other way.
Yeah.
Too.
That's something I can't do.
Yeah, but how does Intel kind of come into play here? I didn't.
I just think that capital gains. I think it's just that they are perceiving that one administration would win over another administration, and that one administration was going to be more stock friendly, right? More interest rate friendly, and more progressive for American manufacturing. And Intel has fabs in the U.S., right? And they get government funding for their fabs, so I think there's all that wrapped up into it.
Yeah. I mean, I
didn't actually look at the price of Intel to know if it went up or down.
I don't know. Actually,
good
I
bet
don't
or
know
not,
either.
but I know as you point out a list of tech people that were involved with it. They definitely took positions.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good point. So, so we'll see. I mean, the whole crypto thing is blowing up way faster than I imagined it would. So
isn't the American government have their own crypto they're going to announce or be part of that?
So you're talking about USDC. So I mean, what they call CBDCs, the central bank digital currency. Yeah, CBDCs. I don't know if the Fed has any policy or is experimenting with CBDCs, but I know that in the last crypto cycle, I mean, there was a lot of talk about CBDCs, and a bunch of startups were raising money for doing CBDCs for, like, I don't know, banks in Africa or in South America and so on, where the currency was more unstable, right? There's definitely a play there. So, but I don't know internally, what the US has plans. I've not been sort of keeping up with that. Yeah.
So Intel, Pat Gelsinger for Intel said that he was excited about JD Vance and the administration's position on the CHIPS Act. Right. So that's coming back to our government spending money on.
I think
chip fabs,
I think the $50 billion CHIPS Act
right.
that was allocated. I think yeah, the current administration, I think, had clawed back some of it or something. Yeah. Okay.
Right,
Interesting.
right.
Interesting. Yeah.
Right. So everybody took their positions, and there's winners and losers. But I think the government in general tries to be kind of neutral on everything, right? Like
Right.
they're just trying to move technology forward. Whether it's one administration or another, I don't think it's that big a deal,
Right.
Obviously, elections matter, but I think technology moves so fast that we're just trying to market technology, right?
Yes,
in the
yes.
end.
I mean, again, I think American, what should we say? The fact that the U.S. has been at the forefront of past technology cycles. We'll have to see how it pans out now, right? I think the world is smaller. Definitely, people have access to the same kind of data, same models, especially with AI, etc. So we'll have to see, are there other pockets of the world, right, who are going to take advantage of all of this, right, at a faster pace than the United States. But there's a good chance that the U.S. Has an opportunity here too.
Yeah, I did learn a little bit last week. I don't know if we're ready. We got one more minute here before we get to talk about what I learned this week and what I didn't learn. I learned a lot this week because I was obviously in
tell us
Europe,
that.
right?
Yeah,
But we'll get there. Any last thoughts around AI technology going over the next 4 years with the administrations?
Yeah, no, I think I'm very excited about what's coming down the pike, right? I think even the election could have gone either way, and I'd still feel pretty optimistic about where AI is going. But I think with this kind of development, and it seems like the markets are reacting favorably, which is actually positive because I think we've been off risk until now, right? So the Fed cuts interest rates just recently, coincidentally, I guess, but we are probably going to have a risk-on scenario moving forward here. So that's a good thing for venture capital, right?
I was going to say, this just brings more money into them, right? The market's strong, lower interest rates, price of capital declines.
Yes.
The idea that Google and some of these others are laying off have always been because the cost of capital has increased, and technology needs capital to invest, right? So startups, PipeIQ, everybody, they all need investments, and certainly as we transition from investing into AI to then harvesting through services revenue, that'll change. But right now, it's particularly investment heavy.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you still need money to build software. It's just that you probably need less of it now than you did 20 years ago, which is true, right? So that's why the dynamics of venture capital has changed as well over time. But nevertheless, you need money to build software.
All right, so we're now in the last 9 minutes of the podcast. We've been going for 51 hours, so thanks for everybody that's listening. You can give us a follow over on LinkedIn. PipeIQ's LinkedIn is there. We're also on
Spotify
and Apple, and so go if you
and
if you search on PipeIQ, you should be able to find us. PIPEIQ. Go check that out and recommend us to a friend, right? Tell us, give us feedback, and we'll go there. So from my perspective, what I experienced over in Europe is a private AI on-prem, right? That the cloud era is maybe coming to an end. Not necessarily coming to an end, but it is. The news I get back, and obviously VMware is vested in on-prem, right? On-prem data centers. But when you look at the pricing, and the AI uses a lot of CPU, right? It's like 3x more expensive than if you were to do this on-prem. And then also all the models have such confidential data in them that you just can't put this data in the cloud, and you need the CPU and the data together. And so that just makes sense. And so data center on-prem AI models are booming, right? So that's one thing I noticed. That's one takeaway is that wow, that stuff is booming compared to like data centers in the last 5 years were almost out of business, right? Like you had a legacy. It was considered legacy. Now, no. AI has brought it back from legacy to this is actually cost effective to run it.
I mean, I think there's going to be, remember, I'd say, the sort of the opposite take on the other hand is that ChatGPT is talking to all these Fortune 500 companies to have them use the model. And is your average open source model, is it going to keep up, right? Like with the developments that ChatGPT or Anthropic gonna do with their models, right? Like so or Claude,
And I have a question for you on that,
Yeah.
right? Because when we were using ChatGPT, there was a basic hello world type of thing that you would run that would show you all the models. And it would spit out like 20 different models that ChatGPT gives you for API. When you're using their API, that you can select the model you want to use, right? And different models are priced different, and they got fat models and thin models and, a bunch of different models. Okay. Somebody mentioned that you can download these models and run them local on-prem, right? Or there was some way that they described that you could get some of these models and put them on-prem, which is why they had light edge models, because it wasn't going to be in the cloud. It was going to be in the edge somewhere, in a robot or in a self-driving car, or that there were models. And I didn't understand that. And they said, yeah, well, you can use open source technology to use these models, and I got lost on that.
Yeah, so
I might be mangling that, so I just wondered.
Yeah, with PipeIQ, we do have quote unquote. Well, it's on private. It's private actually, right? And the way we do that is we use Azure, right? Azure OpenAI, and then so that's one of the things we use. So with Azure OpenAI, the cluster or the container that we get in Azure OpenAI is completely private, right? So that doesn't mix with anything else. The data that we put in there is not used for training,
it's just your customer's
it's just
data
your customer.
in that
So
model.
it's almost as if it's on-prem, right? It's almost as if it's on-prem. So, but I think your point is very relevant, though. I mean, every company, like larger companies, are thinking about their data. Okay, hey, what happens to my data, right? If I train it on the LLM, where is it going to go? So, I mean, my best bet would be, okay, let's me do it like Broadcom is doing right now, as you said, right? You have your own model, right, and spit it out. But the question is, what is the quality of those? How do we keep it at par with the best in class that is outside, right? Is going to be a challenge. Somebody's going to solve, right? Like there's got to be a reasonable way of doing it also, right? So that, I think, is unsolved. But as far as I know, ChatGPT, you cannot just of course, you cannot download or anything. Like, you cannot do that. So I don't know how the models...
I just must have been listening to that wrong.
But I do know that...
About.
I do know that there are models that can be used on the edge, right? Like smaller models, like Google also has some of those on Gemini and Vertex, right? In their ecosystem.
Right.
So...
I think there must be a way to deploy these models in particular on-prem instances, and maybe there's light models, or I don't know. I just don't understand it, right?
Yeah, I just know that OpenAI does have sort of corporate offerings, and we use one of those, right? Like where that's sequestered, right? My data is
so
not
maybe
used
it's
for
sequestered.
probably,
we know it definitely does sequestering.
Sequestering.
But whoever answered the question said, but you'll need an open source product for that. And I'm like, well, that didn't make sense. An open source product to use a ChatGPT model, this didn't add up to me.
That doesn't add up. If you use open source, then you got to rely on one of the open source models.
You got to go get their model and use
the
use
Llama
that
3
model.
and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Right, that makes sense. So that was my learnings this week.
That's awesome.
Was maybe I'm mixed up on whether you can deploy models locally, but that certainly on-prem AI is going to be a big piece of the way people are building these solutions.
I think so. I mean, the only thing, my question would be around costs also, right? Like on-prem models are going to be harder to run, right? More expensive, right? So this is where I think a Snowflake or a Databricks is going to have an edge or a play, actually, Eric. I mean, we should talk about this maybe in the next episode, but I mean...
Yeah, maybe we'll do on-prem versus off-prem and the models. What models are... I'd love to go through the models.
Yeah.
Like, what are the big models? What are the big open source models? How do they work? How do they behave?
Right.
Yeah,
and also the infra, right? Like a Databricks and Snowflake, like a data warehousing infrastructure, right? Where the data doesn't go to the model, but the code actually goes to the data, right? So the data doesn't move. So that's a very interesting paradigm, because that solves the problem.
No, it does. Hey, you take the code to the data.
Yes.
Right, and they still own the code. They're still maintaining the code. Then you run the code against your data to get a model.
That's right. So that is I think, I mean, and that's one of the reasons Databricks has seen a lot of resurgence. I mean, not resurgence, but they've been doing well over the last year or so, year or two, with their Mosaic ML acquisition. I think has been pretty strategic.
All right, what do you got? What do you got? That was
all
mine.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, for me, the big learning this week is, for startups, you got to keep it flying at a high altitude, 40,000 feet. You got to keep doing what you need to do things on multiple fronts, right? Marketing, distribution, selling, product, engineering, hiring, right? All has to sort of has to you got to get all those balls up in the air and do a good job of it. And then team and talent obviously is sort of a critical piece of that. So for me, as a founder, trying AI and AI-centric play for the first time, I think there's been a lot of learning, honestly, right? So I continue to learn.
Well, I know you guys are still working on your, if people want to try,
Yes.
right, try to buy, right? Like you guys have some trials. So
Absolutely.
if you want to get a trial going, you got a free trial at Rajesh Kadam. Go to his LinkedIn page and reach out to him, and you guys will onboard your onboarding trials, free trials.
Absolutely. Right. Just hit me up. Rajesh@pipeiq.ai is my email address, or just hit me up on LinkedIn, right? Like so, and we'll have somebody reach out to you, and we'll set you up.
Accelerate your sales, right? So that you can be here listening to us, right? Free up more part of your day so that you can then spend it doing what you want.
Exactly. Do higher value work.
Right. Make your quota. We should have called it Pipe IQ I quota. Right?
High quota.
My quota.
Q for quota.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Make your quota. Right.
Use PipeIQ for meeting your quota.
Meet your quota today, right? Because that's what I've always said. Is like I struggle with the jobs that I have to do a lot of work and it's measurable. That's that's a tough one, right? But that's what sales is, right?
Yes. Sellers are always on the hook, for.
Well, Rajesh, it's always fun on a Sunday afternoon to talk about what's been happening and what's going to be exciting coming up next week. This was a big one. I can't believe it's only 5 days ago the election happened, but a lot of moving pieces. Excited about all the tech. So thanks for hanging out with me.
Hey, thank you, Eric. This is awesome. Loved it.
All right.
Okay.
We'll be back next week. Until then, everybody go learn about AI and have some fun.
All right. Bye. Have a good one, guys.